To this now, the Association for Savings and Investment South Africa says beneficiaries and policyholders are surrendering or deliberately lapsing policies in order to access funds. According to the organization, the latest data means over 4 million policyholders and their beneficiaries are now living either without risk cover or with reduced cover. National Financial Ombuds Peter Nkhuna joins us for more on this. A very good evening to you. Quite alarming, but also what one say expected in these trying economic times. Tell us a little bit more about this latest data and what it reflects.
Good evening, and to the listeners. I think we could start off by just mentioning that over the years, this is a trend that tends to emerge every time that consumers are going through hardships. People look for ways of saving money, and considering that insurance is generally considered to be something that people can do without, and people buy with a begrudging attitude, a lot of times it becomes the victim when costs have to be saved. So the same thing is happening this time around. We know we are all going through hard times, and unfortunately, some people end up thinking that is the one thing to let go of. This is not advisable, because it leaves one really, really exposed when one ought to have the best cover they could possibly afford, such that being in a vulnerable position as they would be able to somehow provide for any misfortune that should befall them.
Yeah, and I want us to also get into, what you're talking about, the risks as well. However, you mentioned that it's a trend that emerges from time to time over the years, depending on the economic climate and people needing to access more funds or save more money. Do you also find that while this trend may appear throughout the years, it recovers also relatively quickly as well?
That's a bit of a tough one to call, because generally speaking, South Africans don't seem to particularly like insurance. On the African continent, we have the highest levels of market penetration, but globally, we are, particularly from a perspective of comparing the emerging markets and advanced markets, you will find that we are at the lower ends, generally speaking. And therefore, even when the times are good, we will simply be better, relatively speaking. But it isn't necessarily that most people take up cover as such.
And you also mentioned that as well, it's obviously not advisable, because, they do come in handy when that matter does arise, whatever it may be. And you mentioned also begrudging attitudes by consumers as well in paying for insurance. One of the case studies that was spoken to via the media as well, and through these studies too, had mentioned an issue that comes up from time to time where people just don't see this ROI when they are making this monthly premium payment, and then when it comes for the time for them to claim, for instance, after a car accident, and then let's say that insurance company doesn't pay the way they had anticipated that they would, then we've heard those case studies saying, look, well, that's when I decided to cancel whatever insurance that I may have had, because when the time did come for them to cover me, they actually didn't. Do you think that these kinds of anecdotal case studies also lead to this begrudging attitude that South Africans have when it comes to insurance?
Yes, Masa, it certainly does. I have personally spoken and written a bit about this, where through our work at the Ombuds office, we find instances where the industry members do not treat their customers fairly. Claims are mishandled. And as a result of that, remembering also that you're already starting on the footing that a lot of the buyers of these products don't necessarily trust them. and they buy them mainly where they absolutely have to. For example, where a car is being financed, the finance company would insist that there must be insurance cover in place. So it's with that in mind. And then when the insurer doesn't treat the claims that they receive all that well, it sort of reinforces that sentiment that this is a product that I perhaps do not need. And it would do the industry well to introspect in that regard to make sure that as far as possible, claimants are treated fairly and claims are handled correctly.
Yeah, and Mr. Nkhuna, when it comes to that trust deficit as well, from your engagements with the insurers as well, what do they say they're doing about it? Do they see it as a severe problem as well that they do need to tackle?
Look, you have some insurers that generally have the attitude that our office, being an independent auditor that looks at matters objectively, when we say something needs to be reconsidered, looked at, whatever the case, they pay attention and really strive to do the right thing. And then we sometimes also find, like with any other context, some that may not have that attitude necessarily, and we really have to work hard to try and get them to see the light. And it's something that we are continually working on to try to get the industry to operate in such a way that it enhances the trust that the members of the public and consumers would have in the industry.
And also just talking about, you know, the idea that maybe that some consumers do want to keep the insurance, but they just actually cannot because of economic constraints as well. What would you advise those people? Should they go to the insurers and possibly renegotiate with them and try and see if they can get any bit of grace?
It is generally advised that when one requires insurance, which we basically do all of us all the time to some or other extent, the best way to go about it is to have either the insurance company that you would like to insure with or a broker take you through the process. We do what is called a needs analysis. And through that, what is sought to be achieved is to determine whether if I owned a particular thing and I were to lose it, would I be able to replace it? And if I'm not in a position to do so, then I probably need insurance for it. Alternatively, even if I can replace it, but it's going to compromise something in my financial affairs, it is advisable again to have insurance. So the same principle will apply even during difficult times. And in my view, during difficult times, it's even more important because resources are scarce. So you don't want to, when you don't have financial resources to withstand any misfortune that may befall you, also find that when that has materialized, you are in an extremely compromised position. And therefore, what we advise is sit down with somebody like that, let them go through things with you. For example, what you could find is that you could downgrade a lot of the cover that you have and you don't lose out completely. So you would look at the greatest risks that you face and then retain those and perhaps remove those that you think you can handle should they materialize or those that are not likely to happen. Let's look at the current time in the Gauteng province. We are entering winter months. We don't generally have rain in winter. And perhaps those are some of the things that you could remove from your insurance, hoping that nothing different happens this time around and we end up with rains happening during winter months. And therefore, you hopefully will not require any insurance coverage where rain and similar perils are involved. And therefore, that would be something that you could take out and leave those that may remain high risks during winter months as well. So those are some of the things that one could do. let's say looking at a motor insurance cover, you could downgrade from comprehensive to any number of alternatives, depending on what you can still afford. Especially these days, you've got a lot of products that allow a fair amount of customization, and through that you could have some bits and pieces of the coverage removed and retain that which you will most need until you are back on your feet again and you can perhaps take comprehensive cover again.
And that's solid advice, just to kind of go with what you need at that time as well. And just very briefly and quickly, before I let you go, how busy is your Ombuds office right now as there are difficult economic times?
We are generally very busy, and remember, we have recently amalgamated. We had, well, maybe not as recent as all that, but in the last year or so, we have been operating as one unit, which includes the former banking ombuds office, the credit ombuds office, the long-term insurance ombudsman, the short-term insurance ombudsman, all now operating under the NFO. So with that and the marketing of the office that we had to embark upon, and people now, as anticipated, knowing that there is one place where all these matters can go, we have seen some recent increases in the numbers of complaints that we receive, yes.
Peter Nkhuna, thank you so much for your time and just explaining this to us this evening. Really appreciate it.